Hi, everyone. I'm James Garbutt.
And I'm Denny Dumas.
And this is the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast.
Today's hot topic, OCPs, official community plans. What are they? What do they mean? What do they mean for your property value if you live in the city? And Jamie's going to go a little bit big picture on OCP and talk a little bit about what it all encompasses. And then we will focus specifically on real estate, what that means for future density, future appearance of neighborhoods, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, and just to be clear, OCP, official community plan, we're going to be talking about the part that refers to like residential development, because these plans talk about everything long-term in a city, from, parks, services, waterways, transit, trails, and everything in between. But we're specifically referring to development because we often run into properties that are old and decrepit and sitting on big lots, and the OCP is calling for something different in that neighborhood. But every city has a different process of getting there. So, specifically, our office is in New Westminster. And New Westminster, like many other cities around Vancouver, have adopted this Vision 2041 plan. And it was a 40-year-old plan that was developed like 20 years ago. And now the fact that it's 20 years to the end of this vision plan, it just doesn't seem long enough. So, I think there's been a lot of time and energy from these cities into these plans. And from a development perspective, and I'm, specifically with what I observe in New West with all this introduction to townhouse density and higher density, if the intent was to encourage development, it's so far it's failed. It hasn't encouraged development. There's been a little bit of development, but if the intent was to not encourage development, it's been a success. So I feel that the official community plans that the cities adopt are one. I think they need to be 100 years out. They need to be further out. I think I've mentioned this before in a previous podcast. We're in this unique time where they're increasing the energy efficient building code. They're trying to get to a net zero in 10 years-ish. So that means that homes potentially could be off the grid and passive status. But in a couple of years, there's an ambitious plan to get to like step 4, which is pretty far in the energy efficient world. So you're much more energy efficient home than you have today. So, we're in this time where we have an official community plan that's planning for a city 20 years out, which in my opinion, in some examples that I've seen, just doesn't give away enough density for the long term.
Yeah.
And so in a world where we're planning maybe 100 years out and we have these energy efficient homes, I'd love to see these structures being built for the long term minded. And that means stop penalizing people for, going in the ground. The density, the way that we do floor space ratio, FSR, the way that they zone properties, anything that penalizes, and when I say penalize, I mean if in-ground floor space goes against the total buildable area that you're allowed to build, I don't think that should be a thing. I think we should have floor space that exempts in-ground so that it's encouraged to go in-ground. Less of a footprint, less of a massing. Anyway, my thought is there's enough knowledge out there to be smart about the long term.
Yeah.
It would be great to see cities work together, plan longer, and if they are truly trying to encourage development in some of these suburbs, give away a little more. Or give it away more creatively. Give away more in less areas if the concern is that the whole city is going to be under construction.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it's going to be excessive profits for developers. Market's correct. There's other ways you can do it. You can handle higher permit fees if that's the concern. But in theory, building energy efficient homes is more expensive. And the process takes time to rezone a property right now. In New West, it's like a 2-year process. And right now, the way it sits, it's not encouraging development.
I think it's important to understand, even if your neighborhood, your specific property or something you're looking at is on the OCP as higher density, as townhouses, as low-rise residential, it doesn't necessarily mean you can build that today. But to get to building that today or in a year and 2 years, what does that process look like in different cities? Because it's very different in New West versus, you were just mentioning, Port Coquitlam versus other areas of Greater Vancouver.
Let's use an example of a listing we have at 1423 6th Ave, New Westminster. So it's a 66 by 130-ish lot. Depends on, they're going to take away some back lane if you redevelop it. But it is in a zone that's higher density, ground infill, or they had a term for it, but basically it's like a 0.9 FSR, which means that if a lot's 10,000 square feet, you could have 9,000 square feet of structure. And when I'm talking about not penalizing going into ground, that counts for the finished floor space in ground. So my logic there is let's focus on what's above ground and let be what's in ground. But at the end of the day, that particular lot, it's a large lot, but the neighbors have no intent on selling at this point in time. So the 0.9 FSR getting townhouses on one lot is, from a builder's perspective, a builder would have to, one, go through a rezoning process for that. So the current zoning is NR1, which allows you to build 50% FSR, 50% of the floor space above ground, no penalty for going in ground if it's fully below grade. And the new zoning allows a 0.9 FSR, which means that basically if you built a single family home under the current zoning, you could probably get to 0.7 with a basement. And if you went through a 2-year rezoning process, you get to a 0.9. So on an 8,000 square foot lot, that's an extra 160 square feet of buildable, if my math is correct, or 1,600 square feet. 1,600 square feet of buildable. And that's 2 years of public hearing. So one, you have to do the arborist report, get the survey done, get all the plans, architectural plans for the proposed development, the landscaping plans. You're investing $40,000 in concepts, plans, surveys, application fees, all these things to get that extra buildable space to get the townhomes. That's a long process. It's 2 years. To make sense, to start to make sense, you need to get arguably 3 lots in a row to get some scale. And even then, it's not that exciting. And so as an example, when you look at the math of what this particular home in New West would be as a single family, it's around 1.2, 1.3 as a single family. And when you look at the math from converting it to townhomes, if a builder's trying to get a 20% margin and willing to take on the uncertainty of a rezoning process for 2 years, it's worth maybe 1.5 or 1.4. And so that's like a $100,000 to $200,000 lift for townhomes. There's not many builders knocking at the door for that little of a gain over a 2-year period that's uncertain. I don't know if that makes sense.
100%. Yeah. The gain has to be exciting enough for a developer for this risk to make sense. With New West specifically, there's no guarantee that this goes through. Even if the developer buys 3 lots in a row, with all these public hearings and the process that the city has set up for it to actually go through, there's no guarantee that they get what they want at the end of the day, or even what is proposed in the OCP.
That's true. I guess this is where inner knowledge comes into play, because if you're an outsider and you're speaking to the city and you're looking for confidence in getting this development, you're not going to get it. But if you develop in New West and you know the right people to talk to, you're kind of going on likelihood. A few things that could interfere with it is the age of the home. In this particular instance, I believe it's a 1930s-ish home, and the city does value these older homes, so they might incentivize you to keep it, which is part of the conversation that won't give you confidence, and if you plan on tearing it down. And then secondly is trees. They value trees, so having a conversation with an arborist, getting closure on which trees you can remove, that doesn't really give you certainty as well. Yeah. We recently had a client purchase a home at 834 Chestnut in the Heights of New Westminster. And that house, I'd say, was arguably discounted upwards of $100,000. It's a building lot because of 3 giant trees. And you can't build less of a home on it. You can build exactly what you want, but there's 3 giant trees on it. And the uncertainty of trees devalues a property. Not just from, hey, can I remove them? Can I not remove them? But I have to build around that if I can't remove them. So really, if you're buying something with a lot of big trees on it, the right mindset is to go in with the assumption that you have to keep them. And if you get to remove some or replace them and work around it, then great. Yeah. But assume that you're working around it, I think would be a safe assumption. We've
had this conversation a couple times, but when dealing with clients who own property in these areas that are scheduled as something else for the future in the OCP, how do we talk about value with them? Because it really depends a lot on what their neighbors are wanting to do. Right? Yeah. So if they're in an area that is that could be townhouses down the road and they want to sell, are they realizing any gain from that change in the OCP a couple of years ago today?
Not really. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, there are anomalies that are in the higher density areas that,
Right.
That are getting a huge gain. But let's talk, the issue that I have is the townhouse zoning specifically. And I think New West, I'm using New West as an example, but there's other suburbs that are in the same boat. I don't think North Van is necessarily encouraging a lot of development in some neighborhoods. But the overall, the long-term or the biggest issue there is that people complain about housing prices, and yet the OCPs do not encourage development. So, there's people that love to point the finger at the developer, but if developers were given an opportunity to flood the market with supply, I think there would be a little more favor to, like, people wouldn't be necessarily at them for the gain in prices. But when the supply is tight, we're going to just continue to see prices rise.
Yeah.
So, but sorry, what was your question about that? It was
like an owner today, they obviously,
the gain.
they saw the OCP change. What was it, 2 years ago?
Yes.
2.5 years ago. And so on paper, it sounds fantastic. Oh, great. Now my house could be townhouses, which should increase the value because you can sell more doors on my property. But are they realizing a gain today? Like, obviously it depends a lot on whether your neighbors are on board to sell at the same time, because a developer, like you mentioned, doesn't want to buy one lot and build 4 townhouses. They want to buy 3 lots and try to get 14 or 16.
Yeah, absolutely. They want to use the scale. Let's use Sapperton as an example, because that was an area that when this came through, remember seeing a lot of signs go up for potential assemblies. And Sapperton is known for these 45 by 115 lots, 113. So that's a 4,513 square foot lot, if I remember right. But these lots were kind of valued at 1.3 when they were kind of merged as an assembly. And single family homes on these lots are about 1.1. If they're mediocre, 1.2.
Even less,
So call it 1.1, a typical home that's relatively livable and a decent layout. So these people in this neighborhood are looking at a 200% lift.
$200K lift.
$200,000 lift on the OCP if it was bought up by a developer. The issue is, I don't think any of them went through.
No.
So just to give you some straight math on it, let's call it a house that's 1.1 million sitting on a 4,500 square foot lot. If a developer can develop townhouses on that lot at a 0.9 FSR, that's 4,000 square feet of buildable space. Let's call that 3 units of 1,333 square feet. I'm going to guess that if a developer is going in to buy that today, they're looking at a finished value, a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath townhouse, 1,333 square feet. Call it what, $800,000
to sell?
To sell.
Yeah, maybe slightly over, but conservatively,
they're
developers probably
conservatively. So you get 3 of these units on one lot. That's $800,000 a piece. 2.4 million sellout price for this single lot. If you built and sold a home on it as is, you're probably getting in the neighborhood of a 2,250 square foot home that's worth about what, 1.18, if it's nice.
Yeah, in Sapperton you're getting a little bigger, so you're probably like 2,600 square feet, and no, it's not 1.8 today.
No. Well,
it's like 1.6.
Yeah, so it doesn't make sense to build a single family.
1.65 maybe. Yeah.
But I guess at the end of the day, if you have the option to sell your home for 1.1, and a developer looks at your lot as a 2.4 sellout of 3 townhouse units, the cost on that 4,000 square foot of buildable space, I'm guessing a developer is probably looking at it at like $300 a foot with all the kitchens and parking allocation and carrying costs and zoning and all that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less. So $300 a foot times 4,000, that's 1.2 million, minus the we'll call it 1.1 million, say they're a little bit more cost effective, minus the 2.4 sellout, that leaves 1.3. That doesn't leave any margin for the builder.
No.
So say they get their construction cost down to $250 a foot. That's $1 million. Say if their construction cost is lower, the numbers change. But even if it was $1 million to build those 3 townhouses on that one lot, $1 million minus 2.4 on today's value, that's 1.4. They need to get the land for 1.1, really. So that's why none of those assemblies are happening. And even if they picked it up for 1.1, they're relying on market gain. It's not a real sexy project if you're picking up for 1.1 and there's no market gain over the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That might be a little bit confusing for people, but the real simple thing is if a city is truly encouraging development, one, the process needs to be more streamlined than it currently is in a lot of cities. It's too long and uncertain. And if the process is too long and uncertain, they would rather hold that back for negotiation power from a city perspective, just to have a little more control with what comes down the pipe. Then I think they need to give away more. Let people have a reason to line up and get in the queue. A 0.9 FSR isn't enough. I'm thinking like 1.1. So meaning like get more space underground, still restrict the site coverage, restrict the massing, force natural building materials or whatever it is to make the look consistent with the neighborhood and area, force higher energy building codes, use all of this as an opportunity to get better structures up, but loosen the amount of space so people are more willing to go through the process.
For sure.
Yeah.
Any cities that you're seeing right now that are doing a more, productive job of getting development through? Yeah,
so, that's a good point. Let's talk about, not that I know everything about them, but two that come to mind would be Port Coquitlam and Langley. So Port Coquitlam specifically has the downtown area that is, it's a development permit area. And the intent that POCO had with this downtown area was to encourage development. So what they did is they streamlined the process for developers. You acquire 6 homes or 4 homes in this area, you're certain that you can get a low rise or whatever it is that you intend to build. The process is quicker, it's more certain, and they're encouraging development. And Langley is a similar boat. That's why you see so many townhouses popping up there, because they're encouraging development. And, I've heard stories of it can take upwards from raw land, a house on raw land, to a townhouse approval. I've heard it can be as quick as like 18 to 20 weeks, which is insanely quick. Vancouver, on the other end, North Van, New West, they're kind of known as slugs. They move slow. And Vancouver, notably because of how many people try to develop there. So yeah, certain cities, I think if you're an aspiring developer and you want to actually develop, I think, and I've listened to a number of podcasts on this topic in the last couple months, areas that are growing, areas where jobs are growing, because you want people to work in that area, and I think that's going to be a growing trend, and cities that are more developer friendly. Yep. It's easy to point the finger at the developer when prices are extremely high and they're releasing towers and you have to line up to buy them on their terms. But at the end of the day, a great way to resolve that is let more developers come into your market. Yeah. And that's tough for people. I know in New West specifically, a lot of people don't want change. So anytime there is development, there is more likely to be resistant. And I think that goes for a lot of cities. But I'd like to think we're hiring these city council and staff to pave the way for our city, or we're electing them for that. I'd hope that they would be less inclined to listen to the public that doesn't want to change, and more inclined to look at what's better for the long term. Because we're going to keep building structures that are going to get knocked down if we don't.
For sure.
Yeah.
Even you talk about building costs for someone who's looking to build townhouses in New West. The process that it takes to actually get something approved that is 2.5, 3 years, it just adds to the cost. So the land is really devalued because you're holding the land for an extra 3 years and paying interest and mortgage and all that kind of stuff. So how much they're actually willing to pay for the land goes down because they know that it's going to take so long.
Basically.
Yeah.
Basically. The people that the process devalues the land available. Speaking specifically of New West, some of these areas that are, looking for higher density are in neighborhoods that say don't want it necessarily. Like, for example, Queen's Park this is not necessarily an OCP thing, but they have an incentive program to reward restoration of old heritage houses. So you can, get 2 houses on 1 lot is the idea. Those neighbors don't like that. But in Uptown, where it's not a heritage thing, it's more of just they want more density. In Uptown, I think Uptown in 20 years, maybe more, it's going to be really funky because it's going to be loaded with those medium, small size developments of 5 to call it 12 units, where you can have real funky developments. And so Uptown is an area where I think there'd be less resistance. The city wants to see more density. The neighborhoods understand that. The neighbors understand that that's what's happening. Yeah. So I think there'd be less of that not my backyard mob. So if I were to gamble on a 2-3 year out rezoning, I would probably be more inclined to gamble on a neighborhood that is more encouraging of it, like Uptown versus, say, a busy strip in Queen's Park or Glenbrook North or anywhere that it would be the first in its neighborhood.
Yeah.
And there's probably different cities that have examples of that. Why build in New West then, period? Why not go to another city that allows it quicker? My only answer to why in New West is if you're not in the business of developing all the time and have crews going all the time, every developer is struggling with the same issue. There's going to be a shortage of supply ongoingly until this is resolved. So when that project gets approved, you're likely to be in good, favorable selling conditions.
Right.
Just due to lack of supply, because lack of people wanting to go through the process. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my thought. So why would you? Maybe just because you're not in the business of building, you're willing to wait it out, and you're looking purely for upside, and you just want to build close to home, I guess. Right. Otherwise, go to a different city that's more accommodating.
I think that's it.
I don't think I can share any more in this little podcast, but OCPs, rezoning, that world is complicated and detailed. I think it's best to reach out for your specific situation. If you're in this boat, don't hesitate to contact us.
A lot of in-depth analysis on a very specific real estate topic. That's what we're here for, Jamie.
That is what we're here for. That's what we're here for.